Hey, what's up, guys? You're listening to the It Takes a Village podcast. I'm Ashley, your host. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. Hey guys, what's up? Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I'm so excited for you guys to listen into this episode because what me and Gemma Hartley are going to be talking about today is something that we all deal with, and that's emotional labor. And whether or not you've heard that word before, you've probably always felt it, and it's all the things that we do emotionally, physically, around the house that makes our family, our husbands feel comfortable. It makes their lives easier. It's all the things, basically. So Gemma wrote a blog piece that was entitled "Women Aren't Nags, We're Just Fed Up," and it blew up. It was on Harpers Bazaar in Romper, and it just went like wildfire because what she talks about is how we really want our husbands, or we ask our husbands to do something for us, but yet we feel like we shouldn't have to ask them to do that. And yet at the same time, they're at a loss because they say that they can't read our minds. And what Gemma is trying to do is break it down, what emotional labor is, how we can talk to our husbands about it, how we can release or let go of that feeling and that weight on our shoulders that says, like, we need to do all the things and everything is our job, and we got to go to work and we have to clean and we have to take care of the laundry and all these things, on and on and on. And how to make your husband really see what goes on in your mind and like the thought process of how it makes you feel to have to do all these things and pick up the socks when they're on the floor, when your husband should know to pick up those socks, right? Because they're on the floor and he could see them. So it's connecting that bridge between you and your husband, you and your family, and really breaking down what emotional labor is, so that way it doesn't have to be like this big weighty thing on women's shoulders. So I am really excited for you guys to listen to this episode. It's really good. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get to it. Hey Gemma, I am super excited to have you on the podcast today, and I'm really pumped to have you share your story about your book that's coming out in November. And so before we get into all the questions that I have for you and all the things that I want to pick your brain on, I would love for you to share with the listeners kind of who you are, what you do, and a little bit about you and life, and what everything looks like for you right now.
Okay, so I am Gemma Hartley. I'm a freelance journalist and soon-to-be author. I am writing a book currently on the topic of emotional labor called Fed Up, Emotional Labor, Women and the Way Forward. And then right now my life just looks like writing a book. Really, I have 3 kids, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And my husband is at home full-time with me while I'm writing this book. It just happened to be a crazy lucky thing that happened to us. Though some people might not think of it as lucky. My husband got laid off at the same time I got my book deal. Oh. And so he's been home the entire time I've been writing this book, which has been really interesting. And
yeah.
also, let's be honest, pretty good for the book on emotional labor.
Right.
And he just accepted a position at Southwest Gas in Carson City. So he'll be going back to work very soon in the next few weeks, and hopefully I'll be finishing the book in the next few weeks. So it's been very good.
Yeah, that conveniently worked out for you guys.
Yes, it did. Just, have someone home for constant childcare the entire time I'm writing the book. It's been very lucky.
Yeah. So you actually went to school for journalism, and I was in a similar situation that like you go to school and then like you're ready to jumpstart your career. You're like ready to go out into the world. But in your case, it was like a week later you had a kid. And so did you feel like at that moment, in that stage of your life, did you have that internal struggle of, what do I do now? Like what do I do now? How can I do both? And should I do both?
So my situation is a little unique. I decided to get pregnant during my last semester of college. So yeah, literally a week after I graduated, I had my son. And I've written about this before, how I sort of felt like I was getting off the hook. Like I didn't have to apply to graduate school. I didn't have to think about what I was doing next. I was like, well, I'm having a baby, and that's a pretty good excuse to not have a plan.
Yeah.
In certain ways it kind of took the pressure off of me.
Yeah.
When I really felt that was when my son was about a year and a half. And then I started to feel like, okay, what am I doing here? How I still want to use that degree. I still want to be a writer. How do I do that? How do I do both? And that's where I sort of came into that crisis mode of trying to figure out how I was going to make it work.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think that so many of us, we go to school or go to college, and then we have kids because that's what we want to do. That's part of our plan, and then what we don't expect is that, a year into it, 2 years into raising our children, that we feel this outside pull. And then a lot of times for us, it makes us feel guilty that we want to be somewhere else or we want to explore something else when we're at home.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much guilt wrapped up in that. And I often felt that I should really just be able to throw myself into motherhood and do nothing but be the best mother I can be. But it left part of me unfulfilled. And I used to feel very guilty about that my kids were not enough, to be my whole life. Mm-hmm. But I feel like once I stepped into my full self and started writing again and really started hustling and creating my career, that I came more fully into myself and became a better mother through that. Because happy mom
right.
makes everything better. And I was much more happy and fulfilled when I was, taking care of all parts of me, not just the part of me that was a mother.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's so true. I think that there's a lot of power and truth in that sense, that, taking care of all parts of us. Because once we become a mom, I feel like then we just label ourselves as a mom and everything else kind of disappears. And we forget that, hey, I have all these other skills, or I enjoy doing all these other things. And then we just kind of neglect ourselves in that way. But that's actually how I found you, is through one of your writings, through an article that was titled Women Aren't Nags, We're Just Fed Up, which I thought was hilarious. And I really, I didn't know what I was really getting into based on the title. But then once I read it, I was like, yes, I felt this. This is totally something that I remember being in the midst of that. And it went viral, your article did, which I obviously missed out on that. I don't know how I missed it. A year later, I'm like, hey, I read your article. But for those listening who haven't read it, what was behind that writing? What encouraged you to write about this certain stage of your life, or the issue that you were dealing with at that time?
So my article on emotional labor had started really back in on Mother's Day last year, which is sort of the story that opens up this conversation, where I had asked my husband to hire a cleaning service for Mother's Day for me, because I didn't want any material items. It would sort of take the domestic labor off of me. It would take the pressure off of me to sort of delegate out that work to my husband. Or if I did want to hire a cleaning service, there's a lot that goes into that. You have to schedule it. You've got to search out all the different services in your area and find out which one is the best. And, we're sort of doing all of that managerial work all the time in the home. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this would be a good gift, and it would be a good way to show him how much effort goes into taking care of a home. Mm-hmm. And he didn't do it. He did not hire the cleaning service, no matter how many times I asked him to. He checked out one place and he was like, oh, that's too expensive. And I mean, he ran it by me and he was like, this is how much it is. Do you want to do that? And I'm like, of course not. That's a crazy amount of money. You obviously did not research well enough. And so he decided that he was going to clean the bathrooms himself on Mother's Day while I took care of the house and the 3 kids, and everything was a mess. And I just sort of broke down, because I'm sitting here picking up his socks and shoes and taking care of the kids and getting them lunch, and he's not seeing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And he's not seeing the point of the emotional labor that I wanted him to do. And so it really opened up this conversation between us on why it's so hard for me to manage our home and always have to ask him to do things rather than him taking the initiative to do them himself.
Yeah, and that was the point in the article that I was like, yes, because I can remember so many times where I've cried and I've said those same things of like, I don't want to have to ask you to do it. Like, you should just do it. And then they looking at, like, my husband's looking at me like a deer in headlights of like, but how do I know to do it? And I'm like, everything is on the floor, so obviously, it doesn't belong there. So how would you define, so we're talking about emotional labor and we're going to go, continue on with that conversation, but what would you define emotional labor as?
So there are a couple different definitions of emotional labor. Originally, it was meant to describe like the emotion regulation that stewardesses or like airline attendants did in their job. That's like the sociologist term.
Yeah.
But in recent years, it's really expanded to mean more than just the emotion regulation work. And the way that I define it for the purposes of that article and for the purposes of the book is that it's the unpaid and unnoticed labor that goes into keeping everyone around you really comfortable and happy. So it's the mental work, the emotional work, and, the managerial work sort of all combined that people don't really see or acknowledge.
I know that a lot of women are relating to this because a lot of them are probably listening and been like, yes, like I want my husband to not expect me to do all these things. And I feel like sometimes it's not out of, like they're not trying to put all this stuff on you on purpose. It's just kind of how things fell, and then that's how society has grown up. And, those are the roles that we've always played is like the woman does all this. And then if she has a career, well, then that's just a bonus. And she still has to do all the house stuff and all those other things. So how did you start to have the conversation of, hey, like, I really want to do my career. I'm really good at it. I'm doing awesome. And I can't also do all the house things on my own in a way that your husband wouldn't look at you like he didn't understand you or like you're an alien or like, or so how did you start to have those conversations to where you can start to do this side by side and for him to really understand your perspective?
So it definitely was not a single conversation. It has been really a constant dialogue between us over the past few months as I've been writing this book. But I think what really helped to open up the conversation was sort of describing what it was like for me, first of all, because I think it's like, well, why is it so hard to ask me? And I'm like, well, imagine if you had to ask me to do absolutely everything that I do in the house. And then if you didn't want to ask me, you had to do it yourself. Like nothing else would get done. And, that's really the situation that so many women are in, where if you don't ask for something to get done, it's not going to get done. And that was not the best way, to go about it. I think it illuminated some things for him. But that can also really trigger some defensiveness where it feels like I'm blaming him or telling him that he's not doing enough when he is a very good partner. He's a very progressive partner. He really is trying to do his best around the house and to do his best in our relationship and, showing our kids an equal distribution of labor as they grow up. But there is this really deeply ingrained cultural expectation that women are the ones that are supposed to take on all of the emotional labor. And so what really helped was bringing it up as a cultural and societal problem more than like a personal problem that he is not doing enough. I'm like, no, I understand that he did not mean to put the emotional labor on me any more than I meant to put it on myself.
Yeah.
We grew up just intrinsically knowing that these are the roles that we are supposed to fill. And now that it's coming into our awareness that maybe that's not working, we have to sort of dismantle those cultural assumptions that we have about ourselves. And I think it's important, not just for men, but for women also, to look at why they feel, why they feel the way they do, why they feel so compelled to never, ever, ever stop cleaning or organizing, or, they can't like sit down and relax for a moment. And it's not because everything is never done. I mean, that's true. But it's also because we have another sort of internal dialogue that says that we can't ever be done. So it's not, a lot of people are like, well, how do I fix my husband? And I'm like, well, you guys sort of have to fix yourselves. Yeah. Like both of you have to put in the work. It's not just that men are being lazy and not doing their part. Like, we are both really deeply, culturally ingrained with these ideas about the roles we're supposed to fill. And we have to both look at why we're behaving the way we are if we want it to change.
Yeah. And I think that we're so defined too. Like, we define our worth and how good of a mom we are by all these like unrealistic expectations that are like the bar that we give ourselves, that is like this like nobody told us where this bar had to be. We just put it there and we expected ourselves to hit it every day. And then when we don't, we're like, man, I'm an awful mother. Or, like I'm so absent at home because, my job is great, but like my laundry's piled up at home. And I think that you're right in that. That's something that we have to work on, is why is it that I feel like I'm defined by those things, or why is it that I feel like I am less than because I do have a pile of laundry at home, or like I haven't vacuumed my carpet in weeks, or I haven't mopped the floor in like years, probably, like as I'm thinking about my own floors. But I think that it was interesting in your article that you had said, like we can feel like we're doing really great at work and all the things are handled at work. But then people ask us like, well, but like, how are things at home? Or like, how do you keep everything at home so organized if you're doing so well at work? But then you had said something that really got my wheels turning. And that was that, like when our husbands are doing good at work, when, they're successful and they're killing it in their job or their career or whatever, nobody asks them like, hey, so how do you keep the laundry on point while you're, doing this and that? And so I think that that is just a very insightful thing to like look at it that way and say like, wait a minute, like what, like why are we doing that to ourselves, and how is that fair?
Yeah, we're really defined by our role in the home, whether we want to be or not, whether we have a successful career or not. We really do feel that social pressure to be doing great at all the things all the time. And I always look and I'm like, well, what is it like for men? Like, are men feeling that same pressure? Maybe we're internalizing something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
How are you able to get over or maybe you're not completely over it, but how are you like changing your mindset or the way that you think about things, the way that you look at yourself, and dealing with that mom guilt of feeling like you have to do all the things?
I'm not over it. And it is going to take a very long time, I think. I've spent my entire life growing up with these cultural assumptions about what I should do and where my worth lies. And it's very hard to get past. But I'm really trying, I see my husband trying to pick up the emotional labor side of our relationship, where he is managing so much more and doing so much more in the home. And over these past few months, while he's been at home and I've been the one, typing away for 8 hours a day, he doesn't get it all done. I mean, like every day, he doesn't get it all done. And he never feels like a sense of failure about that. And he's doing enough. He is. He's getting, the kids are fed. The house is mostly clean. The meals are prepared. Like, everything's getting done. And I would never, want to look at him and be like, well, you didn't do this or you didn't do this.
Yeah.
But I would absolutely do that to myself. where I would be like, oh, yeah, well, you've done all these things, but look at all the things that you didn't get done. And I think I'm I'm trying to absorb that sort of mentality of enough is enough. I don't have to get everything done and everything done perfectly. And it's very, very hard for me to get to that point. And I am not in any way there yet.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm inching ever closer to that point. I mean, the house was not perfectly clean last night, and I sat down and read a book, and it was hard. But
Yeah.
eventually I got past the anxiety of like I'm sitting and doing something for myself, and every single thing in the house is not done, which is still a very weird place for me to be. But it's worth it. And I think it's really changing the way that I approach life and the way that I find happiness.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you was hearing you talk about it. Like, it's definitely a struggle still, but you seem to like find more joy in yourself. Like you've gained something back kind of, and so I'm curious how this journey from writing the article to now you're in the process of writing this book, but you're also living it out. Like, how has it changed you, or how have you seen yourself change throughout this kind of season of handing over this emotional labor and being more aware of it and being more intentional of like how you talk to yourself and how you're living out your day to day?
So it's changed a lot of my perspective, and it did not change immediately. I will say the first couple months of writing the book, I did not have a whole lot of self-awareness. I hadn't come to this point where I realized that it's not just men, like women also need to change their perspective. So I spent a lot of time just being really mad at my husband, not getting it right or getting it up to my perfect standards. And it took a while for us to figure out a standard that works for both of us. And we're still in that process of finding like what's going to make it work for both of us. And then it's going to be a whole nother thing when he goes back to work in a couple weeks of how do we still make this work? How do we make sure that it doesn't all fall back on me because I'm the one that is in the home working. And it's a tricky thing to do, and I don't think that it ever ends. I got to talk to Bridget Schulte, who wrote Overwhelmed, and interview her for my book. And I was like, you seem like you've done it. You seem like you've, figured it out. And she's like, no, we're still like texting each other pictures of the like sink full of dishes to remind each other that we're not doing it right. Like, it's a constant conversation, and you slip back into those roles very easily. But when you have that awareness, when you have, a little bit more perspective to draw on, it's a lot easier to not let it burden you as much as it did before.
Yeah. So I'm curious what the response was from your articles. Like I know, obviously I'm just one person who responded to your article, but I'm sure that there were like thousands or millions. But like, what did you get from, like, what was the feedback that you got from once you put your stuff out there then, and like all these women are replying or responding or sharing, and did that like encourage you to put out this book and say like, this is really needed, this is something that we need to talk about?
Yes. So the response that I got, it was largely from women, and it was mostly women saying, oh my gosh, yes, I've never had the language to talk about this frustration before, which is such a huge revelation. Like this isn't a new problem, but we haven't had the words to talk about it. We haven't had the appropriate language to really talk about it with our partners, talk about it with each other. It just looks like we're complaining and nagging about these little things, but there's really this whole compounding frustration that fits together in a way that, is really overwhelming. And so it was really wonderful to hear wonderful and in some ways really sad to hear all of these women come to me and say like, yes, I feel this so deeply. And some of those stories were really, full of hurt and full of pain that they have felt this burden for so long and never been able to put a name to it. And so it really has put the pressure on me as I've been writing this book to, I'm not just writing this book to write a book. Like, I want to write this book so that it changes that conversation that people are having with each other and with their partners and with themselves, really, so that this doesn't burden people anymore. I think that emotional labor has a very valuable skill set behind it. It's very much like caring and nurturing and problem solving. And, it takes a lot of intelligence and a lot of emotional intelligence to do. And I think we can, find ways to make it work for us and to prioritize the ways in which we use emotional labor, how we balance it in our lives. And I really think that this could change, could change a lot. It's changed a lot in my relationship, and I'm hoping that it will change other people's relationships also.
Yeah, and I think that, we need to be aware of how we go about talking to our husbands. And like you said, we didn't have the words. And so I feel like as I'm relating this to my own self, that a lot of it does come off as nagging. And that's far from what I want to do. Like, I don't want to be a nag. I don't want to sound like that. So what would you say to women who are like, I want to express my feelings, I don't want to sound like a nag? How do I tell my husband how I feel?
I would really, whenever I talk about this, I always say, bring it up from a cultural perspective, and not a personal one. Don't go into the blame game, because that is just going to make everyone feel defensive and self-righteous, and it doesn't do you any good.
Yeah.
But I think another really big thing for me and my husband, we have 3 kids, and I can approach it from that angle as well, where, we are bringing these sort of old ideas that are not working into our marriage. And I don't want our kids to bring those into their partnerships as they grow up. I want them to be able to manage emotional labor well within their relationships, both, my daughter and my sons. And I think that really sets a high bar for us to make it work, and, to make sure that they grow up with really egalitarian ideas about how a relationship should work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Because and I think that's something that for me and my husband, we're really passionate about, is just showing our kids how to love each other well, and how to, when they grow up, we don't want them to make the same mistakes that we did. And I think that's a very neutral, if you both want the best for your kids, then you can come to it as hey, we're, this is a positive thing, and this is a good change. What is, now that your book is going to be coming out, I'm curious, if women read your book and they walk away from learning one thing, or they walk away from it and they feel encouraged in one way, what would you want them to get from your book?
Oh, that's a hard one to say. One thing that I hope they get from it. I mean, really, I want this book to do many things.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, I really want to give women the language to talk about this, and the language to fully understand it, both within their partners and within themselves. And whether or not they can, move forward and make a change with that. I think that having that solidarity and that understanding is going to be really vital, to walk away from that book and feel like you really get it for the first time.
Yeah. I think that this is a super unique time that we're in, with the Me Too movement and the Time's Up, and your book is coming out just in the nick of time for all of that, and kind of, I feel like at a point where women are finding the language, and we're figuring it out, and we're creating a new dynamic for the way that we do life now, because back then it was so different, and our the expectations were so different, and now it's I had interviewed Lisa Stromberg, the author of Work Thrive Pause, and she was saying, that she interviewed all these millennial men and women, and to her surprise, and a huge percentage of these like millennial men were saying they wanted to be at home and involved with their kids just as much as like the wives do. Whereas in the 50s, it was like, no, I want to work and, I'll let my wife do those things. And to where now we're just in this really unique, stage and time of our lives that we have to find a new way of doing things. And then that requires a new way of talking about it.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And the research does bear that out, that millennial men are so much more willing, to be a part of this conversation. And a big part of this book has been figuring out why would men want to take on more emotional labor? And I think there are many reasons why, there are the good reasons why, you should do this for your wife. You should do this because you love your partner. But I think there are deeper reasons for taking on emotional labor as well, far more personal reasons, because it gives you a more fully human experience. And I think that is something that men are wanting and men are ready for. And so I'm hoping to really add them into this conversation. The piece that I wrote for Harpers was very much aimed at women, and I did not expect it to have the reach that it did and to spark the conversations that it did. And so I'm really wanting to make this more than just a conversation to women, but a conversation for everyone to have.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited for your book. I'm going to ask you our 3 last questions. So as a writer, this might be hard for you, but I'm really curious to know if you could choose one of the most influential books that you've read, what would it be?
Okay, so as a writer, it's literally just too hard. I tried to narrow it down. So I'm just going to go with the most influential book I am reading right now.
Okay.
Which is Ijoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race, which is an amazing primer for absolutely anyone on, how to talk about and take action on, racial disparity in America. And I cannot recommend it highly enough.
What encouraged you to pick out that book to read?
I have been wanting to get her book for a while because I've followed her writing for a long time. I have been a writer at The Establishment, where she is an editor, and a lot of her personal essays have really changed the way that I view race and conversations about race and how I can be a better ally.
Yeah.
And, I still struggle with that, of course, because I am a white woman and I put my foot in my mouth way more often than I want to.
As we all do.
Yes. And, I know that I sometimes succumb to that fear of I'm going to say the wrong thing, so I don't want to say anything at all.
Yep.
I had one of those moments earlier this week where I'm like, I wish I had just not said anything right now. And, I think that this book has really given me a lot more courage to keep having these conversations even when I get them wrong, because it's all a learning experience, and it's bringing me to a better understanding of how I can be better in a world that is so unfair.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I'm learning too, is that I feel like people of other races would rather us ask questions, and even if they're like stupid questions, than us assume that we understand what they're going through, or we just like avoid the conversation altogether. Because, and I think that's kind of like on us, is that we feel awkward and dumb and silly to ask these questions because we have no experience in that. But I think that that's kind of how things start to change. Like, that's how we make a change, is by hearing other people's stories and asking them the silly questions.
Yeah. And I think it really, her book just opens up so many things that you will never think of on your own, and that you will never encounter on your own. And it gives good concrete examples of how you can talk about this without totally ruining it
Yeah.
without totally putting your foot in your mouth.
Yes.
And, you know, she's very upfront and honest that you're still going to have moments where you're going to get called out and you're going to say the wrong thing, have the conversations anyway, learn from them, don't make the same mistakes, and keep moving towards progress, which is really heartening for me to hear because I don't want to stay silent. I want to be able to have these conversations, but I also need to learn how to have them in a productive manner.
If you, or what do you do for your form of self-care? I know that, like, as a writer, I love to write, and so for me, that's really therapeutic. But if there is something else that you do to really fill you up, or like give you life, what is that thing?
So I do feel very lucky because writing is a therapeutic thing for me. It's always been something I like, but it is also my day job now.
Yeah.
And so I do yoga every single day. And that is really sort of how I reset myself and sort of calm all the chatter that is in my mind all the time, especially as a writer. Like, my mind just does not stop.
Yep.
And so doing that every day has been a big part of my self-care.
And then if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
So the one way that I really aim to empower women is through giving them a sense of solidarity in my writing, helping women feel less alone, helping them feel like they are seen and heard. And that is always my ultimate goal when I am writing, to sort of bring people together and to give them a sense that they're not alone with their feelings.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. I really loved talking about this because if one person is thinking about it, it usually means that there are other women out there thinking the same thing or struggling with the same thing. And sometimes it's just good to know that you're not the only one thinking this or feeling this or going through this or struggling with it. And so I really appreciate Gemma sharing her story and talking about emotional labor and what exactly that is, and really giving words to this feeling that most of us have. If you want to be able to find her or know more about her book or when it's coming out, make sure you head to the show notes at ittakesavillagepodcast.com, and there you can find all the links to find all her things. Also wanted to let you guys know that you can follow me on all the places, all the social media places, but now I am also on YouTube, and I've been posting there for some time, but now I've been actually taking the time to put content on there for you guys and sharing my personal journey, which I don't get to do on here a lot. I don't talk about myself on here a lot. I'm mostly sharing the stories of other women. The most recent part of my journey that I'm sharing now is the journey to finding my biological father, and so this has been really an emotional, very surreal and odd, if I may say so, journey. And so if you want to know more about my personal life and just be able to put a face to the voice, head on over to YouTube. You can search Ashley Carroll. I will also link it on my site and on other places throughout my Facebook group and things of that nature. So head on over there if you'd like to. All right, guys, hope you have a good day, and thanks for listening.